everyone. I recently finished up a rather complex mashup slash mix for fun using Bitwig Studio, and I thought maybe some of you would get something out of it at some stage. Maybe not now, maybe it will happen in the future, or never. Who knows? But I thought while it's fresh in my mind, I'd talk a little bit about this before we dive headfirst into talking about production specifically. So when I'm talking about mixing, I'm talking about like a DJ mix, not you're mixing your track with EQ and compression. Granted, we do use both EQ and compression in this mix, but for different reasons. Okay, so in this particular example, what I did was I had a concept in mind, and that was to take the latest Alexandra Stan album and kind of mash it up and tell a story with it. Tell a different story from what the album was telling, or at least tell it in my own way, in a way that I feel might capture the essence of all the stuff that she's gone through in the past couple of years. If you're not familiar with her story, you can look it up. And really, the fact that she's come back with a new album is quite inspiring to someone like me. You know, great to see somebody fighting back. So why not pay them a bit of tribute with an album mix slash mashup? The hard part about this, and this is where it gets challenging, is that I don't have access to any stems. So I had to take the original MP4s from iTunes, convert them to MP3s for this project, and work with fully mastered pieces of music. And that is really very, very difficult. Most of the mashups that you hear from like big EDM artists or something, like, I don't know, Tritonal mashing up with Armin van Buuren, they get access to the stems, and so it's not too difficult for them to make flawless, perfect mashups. If I had access to all of the stems for the Alexandra Stan album, I could do some really crazy and wild stuff, and I'd probably actually come in here and approach this a bit more like that Medean pop culture kind of mashup. And in all honesty, some of the things I'm going to show you here, you can apply those same lessons to doing a Medean pop culture kind of thing if you want. I went in a different direction, and I also wasn't going in a dance-orientated direction. If you're interested on how you can make, those perfect dance transitions, all you have to do is watch the earlier videos on DJing with Bitwig. Nope, this is something very different, and if we just get to the punchline here in advance, you'll see that there's a heck of a lot going on in here, and there's even more automation. There's probably like 500 or 600 lines of automation that have been drawn in manually, and that's another big part of these sorts of projects. I only have one rule when it comes to working with music, and that is to finish what you start. So this was one of those 1% inspiration, really 0.01% inspiration, and 99.9% perspiration. And I'm just going to walk you through some of these steps quickly. If you have additional questions, feel free to ask. So I've always done things like this inside of Ableton Live, and Ableton Live does a great job of it. The majority of guest mixes and things you hear on podcasts or online are all done in a digital audio workstation. It's very difficult to make a flawless mix in Tractor, record it back live, and then send that away and be totally happy with it. It's just not easy to do. Instead, what you might end up doing is recording a sketch using Ableton Live or Bitwig Studio so that we get all of the clips popping out to the arrangement view like so, and then going in and making fine edits. And that's something that we've already talked about in the scope of the Bitwig videos. But with this, what I did was work completely from scratch, and I pulled in all of these tracks at the start. I calculated out their BPM, and then I sorted them based on BPM. And we can see that we have it ranged from 82.5 up to 137. You can see I titled it here. And that is a bit alarming when you want to use everything, knowing that you're starting with 82.5. You have something at 90, at 93, at 95, at 127. That's a bit of a daunting task, but I knew pretty early on how I was going to try to make some of those transitions make it work. All right, and we'll talk about that. But I pulled them all in, I stretched them appropriately, and then I went about creating a bunch of different loops. And you can see all of those different loops inside of here. One thing you might want to do right away before you rename all of them is to consolidate those clips down. So I did that. I used a new project and I consolidated everything. I saved the original so I still had the names. Then I consolidated them, and as you can tell, it did not transfer the names over. So that was one thing I came across early on. The other thing, and this is going to be my one complaint that I'll make in the entire video about Bitwig Studio, is that there's still one fundamental flaw with the program. If you went back, or if you've gone through these videos and you saw and listened to the live deep house set I did with the program, you could hear some pops and clicks and other artifacts that you probably didn't want to hear. And that really wasn't the fault of me. That was the fault of the audio engine not being able to stretch properly. So I'm not sure if it's just my machine or if this is a common problem and they're just not addressing it. But those pops and clicks and audio cutouts, especially when you're working with hundreds of clips, is really, really annoying and really unacceptable for a program that prides itself on being able to both perform, to create, and to produce. And if I was just to play some stuff back here, we'd hear some of those clips, pops, and audio cutouts right away. I'm not going to play anything because I know YouTube will flag the video, and it's such a hassle to try to get rid of that match third-party content crap, even if what you're doing is specifically for educational purposes. But anyway, this is what I had. I split them all out. I came up with some loops. I named them appropriately. I then went in, consolidate all of those clips so we can see how that's changed things in here. And then from there, it was really about coming up with the ideas. What am I going to do? How am I going to combine these various parts? Right away, I knew, okay, I am not going to worry too much about key. And you can see that when I named these, I did put in both the BPM and the key. So A minor, G, C minor, etc., etc., etc. And when you're making a dance-based mix, and this is a very popular thing to do today, is to mix everything in key or in relative key. So maybe you have your circle of fifths near you, and you know that we have C at the top going to G, D, A, E, B, G flat, D flat, A flat, E flat, B flat, F. Okay, and then of course it works both clockwise and counterclockwise in terms of similarities of pitch collections there. And then you can make your mix based around that if BPM isn't an issue. Well, BPM was an issue for me. Also, pops and clicks were an issue for me using the Stretch HD and Stretch algorithms. So I knew I'd be working with repitch quite a bit. And right away I said, okay, don't worry too much about key unless when you combine things on top of each other, they sound really, really bad. Only then worry about it. And luckily I didn't really have too many problems with that moving forward. And the first thing I did was I created an introduction. And for that introduction, I used a couple of really just simple samples from online of tape, vinyl noise, some other things in here. Let's see, what do we have? So all of these sorts of sound effects here I used to try to emulate really more of a tape sound, to actually try to put this into the past, because I was trying to tell a story here. I won't go through the whole story arc because it's rather boring, but you can see that I've combined all these different parts together here. I used some pretty serious EQ on her voice to make it fit, to make it sound old-timey, telephony, and already you can see that there's plenty of automation being used. I summed all of those into a bus, applied a little bit of compression, bounced that out, and then dropped it into the main project here. And at the top here, we have that introduction like so. And from that point forward, it was really about making and designing new sounds. And you can see here's one we have. Let's turn on the audio engine. Okay, so just from that one track, I have all sorts of different things being automated in here. And like so, it continues on and on and on throughout the various tracks for this particular mix. In terms of transitions and stuff, one thing Bitwig is very good at is allowing you to adjust the tempo to change that over time. And I don't have any examples of that at this stage, but in this stage I probably will. So let's see. Yeah, you can see how I've made some tempo changes here. It really sounds kind of old-timey, very classic, and if you have some additional distortion, it actually can come off very realistic. So if you listen to what I did and you didn't know any better, you might actually think that's coming from like a real tape machine slowing and stopping and rewinding and all of that. So I made a few of these tempo changes throughout. Some are more extreme for the sake of effect. Others are a bit more gradual. And so these gradual ones you aren't really supposed to notice as much, but they are there. Again, you can see the number of tracks I have in here. It's quite a bit, and there are a lot of automation lanes to this. So this is where we have that whole 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. Once you have the idea, it's about going in and executing. When you're working with fully mastered material, the best advice I can give you is use a lot of spatial effects, use a lot of delay, and if I went through a lot of these clips right away, we'd see that there's probably a decent amount of like chorusing, reverbing, delay, etc. And I even set up additional send/effect tracks here. I have a high reverb, I have a more of a low reverb, I have just something that I can use as kind of like a tube warmer, delay, chorus, and I set almost all of these on the various tracks into pre-mode so that if I wanted, I could get more of the reverberated signal than the original signal. And that's something I use so many times in here to make those transitions not sound too choppy. And if you listen back to the project, you might think, oh, some of those sound kind of choppy. But trust me, if I didn't have those other reverbs and delays and stuff, it would sound even worse. And making these transitions is very hard. It takes a lot of time getting automation right. And so this is just a patience game if you go about making a mashup like this. And let's just turn that down so we can see these guys a little bit better. Let's turn this on. All right, there we go. Now we have the track heights a little bit bigger. And you'll see pretty quickly, this is really just kind of going left to right, down, and we have all these different parts. Only a couple of times did I use external things. I made a couple of samplers, and with those samplers, I dragged and dropped parts from her song in there. So let's see what this one is. Okay, so that is supposedly the word aces, but it's been completely changed around. And then we have this one. Oh, I gotta go down a couple octaves. And I think I used that one for holding. Let's just take a quick listen to this, what I came up with. And I think at this part, I also was using the E-kick. I think we should be able to listen to this part no problems, and I'll just walk through what I did. This is just one quick example of something you can do. I know this video isn't super informative, but that's mainly just because I'm showing you what is possible, not necessarily how to go about doing it, because you guys are all creative in your own right. Hang on a second. For some reason... Okay, let me try playing this again. So there are really all sorts of things being automated and modulated here to try to make these transitions work. And actually that transition sounded super sloppy because I didn't have my other spatial effects going in. So you actually could hear without those other effects. Now we'll hear what they are. And these are coming from just different parts in some of her tracks where I could isolate swells and fill-ins, which worked really well for the transitions. So if you do try to tackle something like this, look out for those moments. And we'll just start it from here. Okay, so much better there. And you're going to hear all sorts of tails and things coming in and out. So that was just one part where I kind of made my own sort of breakdown and added in an additional E kick, because when I took this guy and repitched it, because it was giving me clicks and pops otherwise, it really lost a lot of weight in the low end. So we can play this here real quick. So I felt like there needed to be a really heavy and strong 808 sub kick for people who are listening back on systems that reproduce that. You'd feel like you were kind of missing something if this is a trap breakdown and we don't have this kind of a big punch there. All right, like so. And really, there's not that much else to talk about in terms of making this. All I can say is it took me a really long time, and it's going to take you a really long time if you decide to do something in this manner. And I know that I got lucky one night because I kind of got in the zone. I had some free time. It was like 11 p.m. until I was going to go to bed. And next thing I know, I'm working from like 11 p.m. to 4 in the morning. And that was really where I got some big chunks of this done. But ultimately, these just take a lot of time. It's just a lot of patience. It's a lot of shift clicking and moving over slowly, trying different swells, using different amounts of reverb, trying everything you could possibly imagine. And that's where Bitwig is really strong, because it's quick and easy. The interface is simple. Obviously, I would have been a little smarter if I organized things a little bit better in here, but you know, as is life, sometimes you don't do that. And you can make changes quickly. You can play things back, try with some of their different effects. I probably used almost every single one of Bitwig's internal effects and some of the effects containers and stuff in here as well to actually make this from start to finish. So if you want, feel free to listen to it and then let me know if you have any additional questions, and I'd be more than happy to talk about a particular area if you're confused. Once again, this video not meant to really be super informative. It's just showing you what Bitwig can do if you kind of set your mind to it. Okay, so another thing I want to show you is that, let's see, what did I title this particular project? Adding new part. So this one right here is called Final Review 8, meaning that there was a Final Review 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 before I kind of got the idea, wait a minute, I actually want to do something completely different. And so as you can see, I came in here at the end and made a pretty big change. And also, let's see, I think I added in some digital distortion somewhere. Maybe it's on this one. Yeah, I added in some digital distortion at the end to give it this kind of really realistic sound. You can tell I'm kind of proud of some of the things I was able to do in here. Ended up being better than I thought. Okay, so something like that. And just now from seeing this, I thought I'd show you. If you're using an effect like the rotary that doesn't have a dry wet control, you can drop it into an FX chain where you do have a mix parameter. And so you can still fade in the effects of a rotary. You just have to use an FX chain inside of it. So that's very important. A couple other things I did that might be of interest to you is I took just a clip of a right here. I have a side dummy track, and this is just a kick drum hitting. It's muted, but there's some times with the reverb where I want to have a swelling kind of punchy feel so that you can still get a sense of what the BPM is of the track. And so I'll kick on the sidechain reverb, and then you'll hear it pulsating and coming in and out, which is a kind of a cool effect. One other thing I did, which most people would really strongly encourage you don't do, if I can find one of these, is on a couple of these compressors, I actually modulated some things on the dynamics. Like, for example, I would take this threshold control here, and if I wanted to hear more of that side chain, I would actually modulate this and pull it down. A very risky thing. A lot of people would tell you not to do it, but it seemed to work. So in theory, as you pull this down, you get more and more of that side chainy pulsing sort of effect. And really, that's about it. The last thing I did was I went in and I bounced this to an MP3, and then I listened back to it to make sure everything was fine, good, and dandy. The other thing to mention is what I put on the master channel, and this is a mistake a lot of people make. When you are mastering something that's already been mastered in a lot of ways, you need to be really careful and really gentle. I added lots of distortion and lots of spatial effects, so I went ahead and added in, another filter here to just cut off anything in the subsonic range up to about 30 hertz. And then for this track, this is not something you would have to do, but I took 2 additional like tape saturation plugins. I think that these two guys sound really well together. The Ferrix from Tone Boosters does a good job on the low end, and the Real Bus does a better job on the high end. Really, really, really gentle settings, because this is adding harmonics to tracks that have already been fully mastered and really slammed. Her tracks were really compressed hard, and so you have to be careful about any additional compression you do, but you will have to do a little bit. And you can see that my ratio here is like 1 to 1.8, and a bit of a slow attack, pretty quick release. I want it to be in and out if it's happening to occur on the drum sounds. But again, it never goes more than just barely visible here. I added in a little bit of additional mid-side. Oops, I had another filter. That's one thing with Bitwig that I hate, is that if you just are scrolling in here, sometimes that will happen. Of course, now it's not happening, but it did just happen. And then I put the L2 on because I like the L2, and I only put it up to a point where there was like no gain reduction occurring, or if there was, it was just on that one really hard kick drum that I had added in myself, so it wasn't limiting something that's already been limited. Be very aware of that, and it's better to just try to get your volume mixes right using the faders and using tool devices than it is to slam a compressor or to really slam a limiter, because you'll just be relimiting or recompressing material that's already gone through those stages. Okay, I know this hasn't been super helpful. I haven't talked about exactly how you'd go about doing it, but really it's up to you and your imagination. If you want more of a traditional sounding, mixing drum beats and bass lines and everything else, just go back to my videos on DJing with Bitwig, and I walk through how you do that. But just to know that something like this is possible, I hope can be helpful for a few of you. And one other fun trick I'll just show you if you've stuck around this long, something I kind of discovered that might seem obvious to some, but wasn't really obvious to me. I'm just going to take a random clip here, and I'm going to open up a new project, turn the audio engine on. Let's paste that in. I'll turn it on to repitch so I don't get the YouTube match content thing. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. This is kind of like a beat repeat trick that you can do if you're willing to spend the time and resample and then kind of slice up what you like. So let's just see if I can get this to work properly. I'm gonna add on delay. Okay, let me just see if I can get this working right real quick. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. This is kind of a lame way to go about this, but it's effective nonetheless. Let's consolidate that. And now check out what happens when I start to like move around some of these start and end points and screw around with the loop. So we get all these kind of cool beat repeat type things going on, and if I wanted to take this even a step further, I could add in like another delay. And let's set this to something like random. All right, this is going to get crazy real quick. I already know it, but why not? Whoop. I might actually be able to draw in a shorter loop. These are some of the frustrating things about Bitwig, is like you have to manually do some of this stuff. All right, now let's try it. Yes. Okay, so why is this actually cool? Well, it's cool because we can resample the results of this and then drop it back into our composition in some way. So I'm going to take the input on this guy from audio 1 post fader. So I'm going to get the original. This one's being sent pre-fader, and then all we're hearing here are the delayed results, and I can record them into this other effect track like so. So let's just go in and turn the auto monitoring off. And now see if we can do this properly. So maybe it's not going to let me get a count in. Whatever. Okay, so that would just be like one example there. And then what we could do is like I could take this particular track, I could then put it onto a new audio track. All right. And now maybe I could send this back into the delay, but I'd change things around, like add in a frequency shifter chorus. Let's just throw a chorus and a frequency shifter on here. So, okay, that's just one example. What I would actually do is I would have gone through this clip and gone through this clip specifically, lined them up for starters, and then just kind of went through and cut and paste parts I like. And I could even then drag and drop those into a sampler, which is something I did in the piece I had finished up, that little album mega mix. So that's a cool and fun technique. It's really simple, but it can put out some just insane results. Again, hope this has been helpful to some of you. Just meant to show what Bitwig is capable of, and not a whole lot more than that. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care.